All right, good afternoon or good morning or whatever time you're listening to this. My name is Oliver Sherman. I'm here today with Mr. Eddie Akiri, who's an architect for Juniper specializing in automation and programmability. And this is one of our latest series of videos or podcasts or whatever we want to call them. And we've talked about Junos automation in the past, but really what we want to do today is take a step back and look at the topic of network automation in general. And this will be one of two podcasts that we put out on this. So without further ado, let's get started. And the way we'll kind of roll through this is we've got a series of questions that we get from time to time, and kind of want to use those as kind of talking discussions. And Eddie and I will kind of go back and forth, and we'll chat through it. So, one of the things that we get a lot is that the term DevOps comes up a lot. Eddie, from your perspective, can you define what you think that means?
Sure. With DevOps, what happened was about a decade ago, server virtualization came about in a big way. They were able to start virtualizing things on top of hardware platforms. And what they realized was that to be able to scale to the speed at which you could bring up virtualized systems, they needed to have a much better way of going from the development lifecycle into the operations lifecycle. And that's not just supporting it, but developing it, understanding how it works, and also doing the support at the end. And then going back to development for new features and bug fixes and things like that. And because of the speed at which they were able to bring these virtualized servers up, they realized that if they could have both the development and the operations sides work together and understand what it was that each set of people were doing, then they could actually start to scale and bring these up at a much faster rate, where the interaction between the two groups almost became seamless, and a lot of the development practices were learned by the operations people, and a lot of the operations practices were learned by the development people, so they could understand what it was they were building and who they were building to. And like I said, over the last decade, this has become a huge factor in the speed and agility of these services that the businesses are starting to offer. So it mostly was built out of the need to get speed, essentially, for these virtualized services.
Interesting. So, I think that really started off in, obviously the larger provider space or content provider or whoever. How large do you think the adaptation rate of this is in the enterprise today, large enterprises moving down into smaller enterprises? How do you see that? How far do you think we've gotten this thing going?
I think it's actually pretty far. It's some things that people consider day to day now are actually what we would have considered 5 years ago to be DevOps. So it's actually been adopted rapidly, and a lot of even smaller enterprises are starting to use it because they see all the advantages of doing it this way, and they're starting to meld those two shops together. And I think in the future, DevOps will become just a standard way of doing things, and the separated, siloed versions of a development cycle and an operation cycle will be gone.
No, I think you're onto something there. I think there's a lot of similarities between, what we did some 10, 15 years ago in server automation and kind of the road we're headed down with network automation. Do you see those similarities, and what do you think some of those are?
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities in it. So I actually started out in server automation a long time ago, and I got into network automation because I saw the challenges of automating networks were not completely different, but they were a little bit different. So a lot of the basic things that you're going to do, whether it's a server or a network or something like that, that you can automate is pulling state information. In a server world, you're looking at disk utilization, CPU utilization, memory. Are the services that I'm running as a VM or as an application on that server, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And the same kind of thing in a network. You're going to be looking at resource utilization, capacity, things like that, and is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? But that's about where the as far as being similar, that's where it stops, right? Then you have workflows that are different. So when a server's up and running and you have an application running, it rarely changes. But networks, as most of us know, change quite a bit, whether it's from a configuration value perspective or some sort of capacity that needs to be added, removed, those types of things. And in the network world, we are able to go in and add this capacity on the fly, change bandwidth settings, things like that. And that's where the power of the automation comes in, because we can actually make these determinations and decide whether or not we need to change something. And if we do, then we can automatically do that. But that's where we're going to. We're not quite there yet.
Well, I think too, I think to agree, I think there's some evolution there, right? Because I think partially that the side of network automation, if you will, kind of interacts with server automation by, spinning up things like, virtual device like a virtual Firefly or a virtual SRX firewall, the kind of NFV things. I mean, do you see that as a reality as well?
Oh, yeah, there definitely is. And that's when you're going to get into the SDN types of discussions, where, the applications are making these demands, and using a centralized controller can actually determine, based on whatever it is that application needs, it can provision that through the network. But that's a control plane issue most of the time. There is some management, which would be the equivalent of using APIs, CLI type things. But I think most of it's going to the automation side is going to be bringing up of greenfield devices and things like that, so that those servers can utilize that. Once it's up and running, you're going to be getting into a lot of SDN talk then.
Okay, so really, so what we're talking about is some of the similarities in between SDN and automation. Are there more, or is that pretty much where we tend? What's the difference?
Well, the biggest difference for me between SDN and automation itself, and these aren't black and white, there's plenty of gray area that we could talk about. But when we're talking about automation, we're mostly talking about management plane types of things. Well, we can manipulate how traffic is changed or redirected or balanced, or however we're going to do it. We're not actually doing that load balancing or the traffic engineering itself through the control plane. So the biggest separation to me is the management plane is basically manipulated through automation, and then SDN is where the control plane manipulations come in, when you're talking about things like OpenFlow, I2RS, BGTLS, those types of PCEP, those kinds of things. You're actually directing traffic using a centralized controller, whereas automation is setting up the device, pulling information from the device, and making determinations about the best way for that device to work.
So what you're saying is that really that automation typically manages or manipulates or changes a configuration of a device, something like that, where perhaps a SDN is more, like for instance, OpenFlow's signaling protocol that manipulate something that is inherently already running on the control plane of a device. Am I following that correctly?
Yeah, that's the basic gist of it. And these two are not mutually exclusive. They work together really well. So if you have a good automation practice, your ability to build SDNs is going to be that much greater than anybody else that doesn't have a great automation practice. If you understand through automation what it is you have, the capacity you already have, the best way to lay things out, building SDNs on top of that will be so much easier, because that automation can actually feed your SDN controller information that it's going to need to make that determination about what's the best path across this network.
Interesting. I think that starts to clear up some of the mystery. I mean, we hear automation, we hear SDN, we hear programmability, and all those different words flying around these days. Some marketing and some of us trying to figure out what it is. But I think that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, and it's not the I have the correct answer. I mean, SDN, like you said, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. but coming from somebody that's been in the automation space for a long time, and I've actually done a lot of SDN work over the last few years as well. The biggest thing that I get with customers when I talk to them about SDN is when they start understanding what it is that they want to do with SDN, they see these glaring holes that could be fixed with automation in the network that they already have. And that's why automation is so important. So they go together. And I think that a lot of people will realize that they can either start with automation or they can start with SDN, but either way, they're going to have to figure out that they should probably do both to get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely, and to create the most efficiency, which is a great part of our next question, right? What are the top drivers you see to move to network automation? We've kind of discussed some of them, about speed and agility, but what else do you see out there?
Well, like I said, one of the biggest drivers has been the move to SDN. SDN's a buzzword in the industry, and people want to know more about it. They want to understand what it is that they can do with it. And when we actually talk to customers about that kind of thing, what happens is, like I said, it opens up these automation holes where they say, well, we could actually, we don't have that information, but we should have that information. How do we get that? And then that's when you have the automation discussion. So the biggest drivers for that automation is actually getting a handle on what is out there, the capacity you already have. When I've done automated network audits before, we've actually found devices sitting there doing nothing, sitting in a closet somewhere, that kind of thing. So customers can actually realize a return on an investment in automation in the fact that they actually have more capacity than they thought they did. Or maybe they don't have as much as they thought they did, and the way that they have things configured kind of blankets that and keeps them from seeing it. Another thing that we get that's huge for automation is compliance testing and auditing, especially if you need Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA compliance or any of those government standards. Automation is key for that, because what you have to do is you have to go out and make sure that your thousands of devices actually match what is supposed to be in the network, and the configurations on them are matching exactly what they need to be in compliance. Now, the compliance doesn't necessarily mean you have to have particular configurations. Maybe the compliance is they all have to be the same across a certain family of devices. And that type of thing, while you can do it manually, it's a slow, painful process. With automation, it's something that you can do in a matter of minutes. And if something changes, you could be alerted to that and run that audit again. And in another matter of minutes, you can pinpoint where the compliance is out of bounds or what happened to make it go out of compliance.
No, perfect. I think those are some great reasons. And, I think stability and complexity and all the things that are out there today. As you and I have traveled around, one of the interesting things that I've noticed is that there seems to be some reticence in some of the engineers out there that, think that we're all going to be replaced by robots and that, automation is a threat to them. So if I'm a network engineer today, do you think I should be concerned about automation in the market and what that's going to do to my position?
No, not at all. And I do get on that question a lot, not in a group setting, but usually sometimes people will pull me aside afterwards or something like that and say, what's going on with this? Do I need to worry about it? They don't want to be a programmer, that kind of thing. And, when I first got into this industry about 20 years ago, it was put warm bodies in the seats. We needed so many people, and we were understaffed and everything. So people that understood the basics of the CLI could get in there and make a difference, and they could do what they needed to. And that was because the business moved at a speed at which that was acceptable. But now, because of certain business drivers and the agility of server virtualization and everything, we need the network to be just as fast. We need to be able to deliver features not on a monthly time scale, but maybe even a hourly time scale. And be able to make feature fixes and things like that and develop those and put them into the production network in a matter of hours, or maybe even days, maybe days. But you can't wait 18 months anymore. It's just not acceptable to our customers, and they want things now. So the network engineers of today, what they're going to need to do is continue to move along with the evolution of the network. and the network does need to evolve to be more automated. You're going to get into SDN and things like that, but it doesn't mean a wholesale career move or anything like that. Network engineers are smart people. They learn network technologies, the newest, the latest, and greatest that come out. They implement them, they test them, they understand what it is they're doing. So essentially what they're going to need to do is take that and just learn basic programming, scripting skills that will allow them to be able to do that in a quicker manner. That's essentially all it is.
No, absolutely. And I think,
it's really...
I think as well as the question of scale, right? I mean, I think the more bandwidth that is demanded of the network, the more ports we're putting on the network and everything else, that, intrinsic knowledge that I have as a network engineer, my vast understanding of protocols and everything else, once I've mapped out that network and once I've designed that network, if I now have to put that command in 94 devices, A, that opens me up for human error, but B, that's inefficient, right? So I think that high-end knowledge in networking is always going to be needed. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's and I'm pretty sure that 99% of network engineers that I've worked with in past jobs when I was a network engineer and as customers, they automate in some fashion, even if it's not what the business would consider full-blown automation. They automate things because it makes their lives easier. They don't want to do that same task over and over again. Like you said, 94 systems. So everybody has a little bit of background in it. Whether they know that or not remains to be seen, but it's really not that big of a leap.
Yeah, even if it's Control H or find and replace a notepad, right? That's some form of automation, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It is. You're instructing. You're using the computer to instruct it how to do something, right? Rather than you arrowing down and finding each one on your own, you use that find and replace command.
Yep, exactly. So I'm a network engineer now, and you've assured me that everything's going to be cool. I do want to start and learn more about automation. What do you think I should start?
Well, it depends on where you are in the automation cycle in your business. What is the business looking to do? If nobody's even mentioned it, if you already have an IT framework that you use, you have NMS systems that you already use, it really depends on that. But let's take each one of those as an example. If nobody's really talking about automation, or they're just talking about it from a high level and nothing's automated, the first thing that I would learn how to do is probably learn a good programming language. Probably the best one right now is Python. And I get people to ask me, well, why shouldn't I learn Java when we have these Java things and things like that? Python is much simpler than Java, but it's very powerful. You can do a lot of things in Python quickly that you wouldn't have to worry about so much like as if you did in C, right? You don't have to worry about allocating memory and things like that. Python takes care of that for you in the background. So I would learn that programming language. Another place that you can start, regardless, even if you don't want to learn the programming language, is use a repository system like Git. Git's the most popular. GitHub, some people have heard of that as well. And I can tell you, as somebody, as a network engineer that's tried using it, you will be very frustrated when you try to use it at first. You want to understand why is this such a big deal? What do I need this for? But understanding how it works, and the first time it saves you when you make a mistake in a configuration, and you can actually roll back to that configuration or the previous version of that configuration, and it saves you, and it was just a simple command to do that, that's when you'll see the value of it. And the great thing about it is if you learn how to use things like Git, that's what developers use when they develop their source code, right? So that's where you start getting into the DevOps, where operations understands what development is doing and how they get to where they are to that point when they develop that feature. If you already have an IT framework, like a Puppet or a Chef or an Ansible, SaltStack, or anything like that, then I would suggest probably learning that particular application first to understand what are the things that I can do with it right away. What are the recipes or the playbooks that I can build that will help me in my day-to-day job. And then after that, still try to learn your Git and your programming language, whether it be Python or Ruby or whatever, because once you understand how those work and you understand programming, then you can extend those to do other things and provide value to your business and to make your job more valuable and easier to do.
No, that makes total sense. So we're getting a little long here on time. We didn't want to don't want to make these too long, but let's stop with one final question and kind of a lead in for our next conversation. What would you say is the most popular question you get around network automation?
Actually, the most popular question I get about network automation is, what is network automation? And when people ask me that, I return to them with the question that it's the same thing as asking a network engineer, what is networking, right? There are so many different avenues that you can go down to explain it, and they're all right, but automation means something different from one person to another. And it's not something that you can just package nicely and say, this is automation, right? Just like you can't say, this is networking. You have protocols, you have servers, you have end hosts, things like that, devices, and they all play a part of that networking. So when I get asked about network automation and what is network automation, I tell them, pick something that you find interest in, or something that you think will provide value for what it is to automate in your network, and start there. And then you'll learn everything as you go along, because it's all interrelated, just like networking.
No, I think that's a good answer, and I think it's definitely interesting. I think one of the things you and I get a lot too, whether talking to partners or customers alike, is, well, what are other customers or partners doing, right? And I think we're still kind of working all that out. And then, of course, my favorite statement is, I want to automate everything, and I think that's an interesting topic, and perhaps we'll discuss that a little more next time. But Eddie, I think it's about time to wrap up. Any final thoughts before we shut this one down?
No, just understand that automation isn't as the big bugaboo that a lot of people actually make it out to be, and it's actually very exciting. In the same way, the first time I actually got MPLS running many years ago, you get the same feeling when you automate something. And it's exciting, and it allows you to progress in your career, and it's a big deal, I think.
When you see that first ICMP packet return a reply, I like it. All right. Well,
yeah, exactly.
Everybody, thanks for listening. We'll get this out, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.